Hello, friends. Welcome to today's discussion on Schedule Y of Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1940, Rules 1945. Schedule Y lists down the requirements and guidelines on clinical trials for import and manufacture of new drugs. Upon completion of this topic, students shall know why are clinical trials performed, what are the responsibilities of a sponsor, what information is required for a pharmaceutical drug product for initiating clinical trials? What is preclinical study and different phases of clinical study? Let us see what is the nature of clinical trials in the Indian subcontinent. The clinical trials are to be carried out in India before a new drug is approved for marketing and depending upon the status of the drug in other countries. If a drug is approved and marketed, that is, they are in phase 4 in any other country, in India, phase 3 trials are required. If the drug is not approved or marketed, trials are generally allowed to be initiated one phase earlier than the phases in other countries. For the new drug substances discovered in India, clinical trials are required to be carried out in India right from phase 1. Permissions for trials. Permission to initiate clinical trials with a new drug may be obtained by applying in Form 12 for a test license. Investigators should possess appropriate qualifications and experience and should have investigation facilities. Permission of initiating a clinical trial is issued along with a test license in Form 11. It is desirable that the protocol is reviewed and approved by institution's ethical committee. For new drug having a potential for use in children, permission for clinical trials in pediatric age group should only be applied for after completion of phase 3. The following are the responsibilities of a sponsor or an investigator. The sponsor, interested in initiating clinical trials, is required to submit to the licensing authority, in India it is the DCGI, as given under the Rule 21, an annual status report on each clinical trial. That means if they are interested in initiating phase 2, they have to submit a report for phase 1. All the studies ongoing, completed or terminated, they have to be informed to the DCGI. In case terminated, reasons should be stated. Any unusual, unexpected, or serious adverse reactions should be promptly communicated by the sponsor to the licensing authority. In all trials, an informal written consent is required to be obtained from each volunteer in prescribed forms, which must be signed by the volunteer himself participating in the clinical trial and the chief investigator or the doctor participating in the clinical trial. The following chemical and pharmaceutical information should be furnished to the DCGI before initiating clinical trial. The generic name and or any other approved name with dosage form and strength should be provided. The patent status should be described. Brief description about the physical, chemical, biological properties of drugs such as neutralizing equivalence, solubility, partition coefficient, hygroscopicity, crystal properties, X-ray, melting point, boiling point, etc. should be enlisted. The following animal toxicology studies is required before initiating any clinical trials in humans. The data should be furnished to the DCGI for applying for an IND, investigational new drug, in humans. The acute toxicology covers two species, rats and mice, using the same route as intended for humans, For example, if it is oral administration in humans, it is also desired that in the animal models the drug be administered through the same route, and then at least one additional route to ensure systemic absorption of drug should also be undertaken. Mortality should be looked up for 72 hours after parenteral administration and up to 7 days after oral administration. Symptoms, signs, and mode of death should be reported with appropriate microscopic or macroscopic findings where necessary. LD50 should be reported preferably with 95% confidence interval. Long-term toxicity should also be observed for behavioral, psychological, microscopical, biochemical observations should be made both on rodent as well as non-rodent population. The following reproduction studies should also be carried out in animal models: fertility studies, teratogenicity studies, perinatal studies, local toxicity, mutagenicity, and carcinogenicity. Specific pharmacological actions are those with therapeutic potential for humans. These should be described according to the animal models and species used. Wherever possible, dose response relationship and ED50 should be given. Special studies to elucidate mode of action may also be described. General pharmacological action, its effects on other organs and systems, especially cardiovascular, respiratory, and central nervous systems, shall be elaborated. Pharmacokinetic data to help relate the drug efficacy and the plasma concentration with respect to time of the drug should be observed to the extent that is available, and all the data should be furnished to the regulatory authorities. All the chemistry, manufacturing, and control, along with the animal toxicity studies, are then furnished to the DCGI in order to obtain license for initiating human or clinical pharmacology in humans, that is the phase 1 trials. The objective of phase 1 trials is to determine the maximum tolerated dose in humans, pharmacodynamic effects, adverse reactions if any, with the nature and intensity and pharmacokinetic behavior of drug as far as possible. These studies are carried out in healthy adult males using clinical, physiological, biochemical observations. At least 2 subjects should be used on each dose. Phase 1 are carried out by investigators trained in clinical pharmacology and having the necessary facilities to closely observe and monitor the subjects. They may be carried out at 1 or 2 centers. Explanatory trials or phase 2 trials. In a phase 2 trial, a limited number of patients are studied carefully to determine possible therapeutic use, effective dose range, and further evaluations of safety and pharmacokinetics. Generally, 10 to 12 patients are studied at each dose level. These studies are limited to 3 to 4 centers and are carried out by clinicians specialized in the concerned therapeutic areas and having adequate facilities to carry out investigations for efficacy and safety. So we can conclude, while a phase 2, phase 1 study can be done on healthy patients, healthy population, 10 to 12 in number, a phase 2 trial is generally done on patients, approximately 30 to 40 to 50 patients, to ascertain the therapeutic use and effective dose range. Upon successful predictive outcome of phase 2 clinical trials, the data and the report is furnished to the DCGI to obtain license and permission to initiate phase 3 studies. The purpose of these trials is to obtain sufficient evidence about the safety and efficacy of the drug in larger number of patients, generally in comparison with standard drug or a placebo as appropriate. These trials are carried out by clinicians in the concerned therapeutic areas having facilities appropriate to the protocol. A comparative study includes, for example, a new drug like empagliflozin has to be introduced in the market, and metformin is the standard drug of choice for any anti-diabetic preparations. So, all the studies for empagliflozin, that is a new anti-diabetic molecule, is to be compared with the existing metformin standard therapy in order to prove the benefits overweigh the risks and the new dosage form is better or comparable to the existing therapy. If the drug is already approved in other markets, phase 3 data should generally be obtained on at least 100 patients distributed over 3 to 4 centers to confirm the safety and efficacy. If the drug is a new drug discovered in India and not marketed in any other country, phase 3 data should be obtained in at least 500 patients distributed over 10 to 15 centers. In addition, data on adverse drug reactions observed during clinical use should be collected on 1,000 to 2,000 patients. Such data may be collected by clinicians who have given a written consent to participate in the said purpose. The selections of clinicians for such monitoring and supply of drugs to them will need approval of licensing authority under Rule 21. Now that brings us to the end of discussion of the topic Schedule Y as per Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1940, Rules 1945. Thank you for your time.